Good morning, everybody. I was just saying to the side, picking the intro music and the loo break music has been one of my favorite things about summer school. How are we all going? It's so nice to see everybody. Shout out if this is 3 of 3, and if you've been here since the beginning. By week 3, I'll finally introduce myself properly. My name is Sophie. I'm from Firmcheck. I'm the Events and Communities Manager. I'm the one responsible for creating these sort of education opportunities and webinars and things like that for you. And I really enjoy them, and I really enjoy seeing you guys talking to each other and sharing what you've learned. What I'm going to quickly do is just share a little bit about summer school and where we're at in terms of our maturity understanding. So we're at week 3. So let me bring up my slides here. So those went funky, apologies. So we're at week 3, level 3, competent. So what we're aiming for here is if we've implemented everything that we learnt within level 1 and level 2, level 3 is where we should be relatively AML compliant, and at Firmcheck we call it the line of compliance. Everything is under control, and you should be relatively compliant, but you're still going like, oh, AML compliance is a pain. It's annoying. It still takes me lots of time, but I'm not worrying about it as much as I have before. When we move to level 4, that's where it starts to feel a bit more comfortable. It's less cumbersome. It's taking you less time. And level 5 is excelling. So for week 5, that's where we talk about how to manage crypto assets with AML compliance, AI and AML, those sorts of kind of more advanced topics, should we say. So as I said, competent, we will cover 6 fundamental elements that you should have in place by level 3. But this is where, as I said, all your staff have an awareness of what AML compliance is within your firm. Maybe you're using a technology, maybe you're using Firmcheck to kind of make sure that that's in place and that everything is running as it should. But let's dive into those 6 areas of fundamentals to AML compliance. So you have your firm-wide risk assessment in place. Remember that we have the risk assessment course that we published last week. You have a policy, controls and procedures document in place, and make sure that these are both relevant. You're conducting AML training for yourself and your relevant staff. Remember that this counts as AML training, and all your clients' IDs are identified and verified. You're conducting client risk assessments on everybody, and this is updated annually. Now, it sounds like a lot when you put it in a list like that, but once you build that system in place, it all starts churning around. So what are we doing here today? What are we going to be covering in level 3? So soon I'll be bringing on Lucy from Calathea Solutions. She'll be explaining due diligence, so simplified due diligence, client due diligence, enhanced due diligence, which I found confusing for a long time. And often people go, oh, if I've got a low risk client, that means that I can just do simplified due diligence, and that makes it easier, doesn't it? It's less work. And that's a no, and Lucy will explain that. She'll also talk about navigating ID checks. There's a lot of different ID verification tools on the market, and how and when to apply those. We'll be talking to Mark from FYI, and he'll be talking about effective document management when it comes to AML compliance, and how to ensure that everything doesn't fall apart when you've done all your best work. And then we'll finish with Ian, who's covering the topic of SARS, which I'm really excited about. There's a lot of myths and lore when it comes to SARS, so I'm really excited that we kind of are going to unpack that, and especially with Ian, who has such a huge wealth of experience. We don't have any new courses this week. I'm really sorry, but just a reminder of what courses are available already that you can dive into. So remember that summer school is meant to be, we will do quite snippy, quite quick webinars as we're doing today. But if there's any topics that take your fancy, you can dive in deeper into those in our course schedule. There should be a little pop-up somewhere that will come up that will give you the link of where those courses are if you haven't engaged with them before. I think that covers it, should be. And Morag, when you say published, where is that? When Lucy's talking, I'll share the document that we have for the AML maturity framework and the research that we conducted. It's very meaty. But it should help you understand where you're at with your compliance. And I'll also share the AML health check that you can fill out to understand what level that you're at. I think it's the first time I've done an intro that's finished on time, which is really good. I would hope that by week 3 that we're there. So I'd like to invite on the stage now Lucy from Calathea. If you were at the AML Summit in February, we might be doing that again this coming February. She was there each day answering all of your Q&A questions, and she's a really great resource when it comes to helping people understand what they need to do about their AML compliance. Calathea also do mock audits as well, which you can talk to Lucy about as well. If you're not sure where to get started, that's a really great resource. Morning, Lucy.
Good morning. Can you hear me and see me? Because I had a bit of difficulty then.
No, I can hear you, see you all clearly, all great. So we'll start off by talking about due diligence. I'll leave you to it. I'll wander away and give you the stage, if that sounds okay.
Okay. Yeah. That's absolutely fine. Yeah.
Okay. I'll pop in if there's any questions that come up. Yeah, if that sounds all good.
That sounds all right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Fantastic. I'll leave you guys with Lucy.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. So, client due diligence. I know in the introduction, Sophie's talked about simplified, standard, enhanced. I'm actually going to just change the order a bit because that's the way it really works. So, client due diligence is when you get to know your client. You're checking their identification documents and you're verifying that. Take it back a step. You're doing your client risk assessments. That will determine the level of due diligence you need to do. So if we look at the basics, your client due diligence, you have to apply that to all your clients. So it means identifying the client, verifying the identity, and assessing the purpose and intended nature of the business relationship that you're forming with them. Part of the intention of the client due diligence is both to get to know your client, but also to get to understand them and their business and how they work, so that then you are in a position where you're able to identify where things aren't normal, where there might be suspicious activity going on. So you're doing that with your client. Now, if you've got a corporate client, so your client's a company, you also need to obtain and verify the name of the company itself, its registration number, its registered address, and if different, its principal place of business. So you're looking at the people within the company itself and the company. So you're required to identify and verify all directors of the company, as well as the persons with significant control, and they can be different. You need to make sure that you work your way back to the ultimate beneficial owner. So if your company is owned, so if the person with significant control is actually another corporate body, you need to look into that corporate body and work your way back to those ultimate beneficial owners and identify and verify them. It needs to be done prior to commencing the business relationship. Although the regulations do allow for a bit of leniency in certain situations. So it's quite a narrow field, but there is that scope there. In a vast majority of cases, you need to do it beforehand. And if you don't do it beforehand, you need to do it as soon as you possibly can, and you need to document why you haven't done it prior. So basically, don't leave it. Okay, so the documentation you collect needs to be retained. So for each of those directors, each of the persons with significant control, each of your partners, your private clients, you need to collect a piece of photo identification, and you need to collect a proof of address. And they need to be separate documents. So if you've got a driving license, you can't use that for both. You are required to tell your client that you are collecting that documentation, and you will be retaining it. And that is for the purposes of anti-money laundering. They need to be notified of that before you start your business relationship. Most people will put a sentence in the letter of engagement just to cover themselves with that regulation. And you are expected to retain your client due diligence for 5 years after the business relationship has ceased. Now, if you have any reason to believe that you might need to keep it for longer, so you suspect there's an investigation ongoing or you are aware of some kind of investigation, you keep it for longer, but you must keep it for 5 years. And your supervisor, if they come and inspect you, might well ask to see the information you've got for ceased clients. So do be aware of that and do keep hold of it. Now, if you are not able to identify your client, so if they will not give you documentation, you cannot start that business relationship with them. If it is a current client that you already have, you need to cease trading with them. You cannot work with someone that you cannot identify. Now, it's slightly different if that person is unable to supply you with photographic ID. Maybe they don't have any. In those cases, you are permitted to work for them, but you need to do enough due diligence. You need to find enough information about them. You need to be provided with enough documentation to be able to satisfy yourself that they are who they say they are. So a really good one would be a shotgun license. You could have bus passes, lots of bank statements. Now you need to make a note in all your records of what you have taken from them, justify your decision, and reflect that in your client risk assessment. So I said that is kind of standard due diligence. Now I said your client risk assessment might influence what level of due diligence you need to do, but that is your starting point. So when you do a client risk assessment and you identify that your client is a high cash turnover business, or there's a politically exposed person, or they trade in a high-risk third country, you are required to then do enhanced due diligence. So enhanced due diligence is building on that standard due diligence, your client due diligence, and you need to take further measures in your due diligence efforts on your client. So as I said, enhanced due diligence is required where there's a higher risk of money laundering or terrorist or proliferation financing, where the client is based in or operates in a high-risk third country, where the client is a politically exposed person or a family member or known close associate of a politically exposed person, or where there is a transaction that's complex or unusually large or makes no apparent economic sense. So EDD, so enhanced due diligence, should include, and in some situations must include, seeking additional independent, reliable sources to verify the information that you've been provided by the client or is made available to you. You could take additional measures to understand better the background, the ownership, and the financial situation of the customer and any other parties to the transaction. You could take further steps to be satisfied that the transaction is consistent with the purpose and intended nature of the business relationship. Increase the monitoring of your client's transactions, of your business relationship. So include in that greater scrutiny of transactions, be extra vigilant of differences. So anything that is outside of the norm, bring your parameters down, so it would flag in your consciousness slightly earlier than, say, a low risk client. You might want to, and in some situations you would need to obtain information on the source of funds or the source of wealth for the customer and their transaction. So source of funds is the money that they are using in that particular transaction. So if they've suddenly bought money in to buy a property, where has that money come from? Whereas source of wealth is their accumulated wealth. How have they got to where they are to have that money in the first place? And then another thing you can do is obtain the approval of senior management for establishing or continuing the business relationship, which you'd have to do in the case of, say, a politically exposed person. Enhanced due diligence, or all due diligence, you are reviewing on a regular basis. Now, most supervisory bodies would say annually. So in the case of a client where you're applying enhanced due diligence, you might bring that forward and just review them every 6 months, say, just to give that extra vigilance and scrutiny over them. And then when we talk about simplified due diligence, it's where you might adjust the extent and timing of the due diligence that you apply to your client to reflect that reduced risk of money laundering that they present. So as Sophie said, if you've got a low risk client, you can apply simplified due diligence, but it's not all that easy. So simplified due diligence can be applied where a client has been assessed as low risk, but we're not talking about the low risk that would be calculated by your any software that you're using and the algorithms within that. You're talking about where your client is a public administration or listed on a regulated market, where, I don't know, we've got some people that some clients that have schools as clients. Now, all the money coming in there is government money, so they could be considered low risk. So you've got to be very careful. You've got to justify why you believe you can do simplified due diligence, and you still have to collect all that information. You just tone it back a little bit. Again, ongoing monitoring for unusual transactions or suspicious activity is still required, but the firm's policy on when and how to apply, and the firm's policy on how and when to apply simplified due diligence needs to be documented in your control policy. So the level of due diligence you do has to, at a minimum, identify and verify your client, and your ongoing monitoring needs to make sure that everything that you have seen is in line with the what you expect from your client. But the extent and the timing of what you do is dependent on how you have risk assessed your client and whether you are doing standard, enhanced, or simplified due diligence. I'll leave it there on due diligence for the moment and come to the questions, Sophie. Which of you want me to go through those?
Yes, please, if that's okay. I've brought up the one from Gemma, just trying to define what means to be cash intensive.
To an extent, you have to decide what is cash intensive. If you look in the CCAB guidance or the regulations, there are certain businesses that would be considered generally more cash intensive, such as your restaurants, your hairdressers, your nail salons, those where people are still expected to potentially pay by cash. And you just got to make sure that you've got controls in place to be able to monitor the cash coming in. Now, they are higher risk because obviously if you've got a client who's taking cash for services and it is not documented anywhere, you're not on hand all the time, you potentially can't see that. So you just have to be aware that actually it pushes your risk up. It doesn't make them a money launderer. You just have to be aware of those risks, but what controls you can in place and be vigilant to what they're doing. I haven't actually read the question. Does that answer it?
I believe so. From what I gather from what you've said, cash intensive, yeah, as you said, is businesses that are dealing with cash, really. Cafes, food trucks, laundromats, ironically, like anything, yeah, that is a little bit harder to track. Okay, we've got one from Emily as well here. About SOW/SOF during onboarding?
Source of funds during onboarding. I've an opinion you should have an understanding as it flags in. Well, absolutely. As I said at the beginning, your client due diligence is about getting to know and understand your client. And part of that would be discussing their business, how they're lots of people will look at previous sets of accounts to understand what the turnover is likely to be, where the money is coming from. Lots of your client due diligence and risk assessment softwares will have questions on how the business is funded. Is it from turnover? Is it from investment? Is it from grants? Whatever. So yeah, absolutely. You want to get as much understanding of your client as you can at onboarding, not only for due diligence reasons, but also so that you can offer them the services that they want and be able to potentially upsell to them.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something that you and I have talked to, but I think is a really good perspective of taking when it comes to AML compliance, is rather than being like, oh, it takes up so much time, I don't get paid for it, using it as a metric to kind of dive into the client's business and then understand how else you may be able to help them that they maybe haven't flagged. Gemma's just clarifying as well. So it's about the business type, not the actual client when it comes to cash intensive businesses. So like the business type being a cafe or both.
Yes, but if you've got a cafe that doesn't accept cash payments, then potentially no. There's the potential in any business that they're taking cash in hand. But it's so yes, Gemma, kind of because they tend to have more cash. So
I think it's like with anything in AML, there's no straight answer. You kind of have to look at it and review it at each individual level.
Absolutely, and throughout the regulations, that you've got to, and it constantly says applying a kind of risk-based approach. So within your policies and procedures and controls, work out what you consider to be a cash-based business, and work with that. But you've got to be able to justify your definition. So it's kind of, it's up to you to an extent, but it's got to make sense and it's got to be justifiable.
Yeah, you have to be able to explain it to your supervisory body.
Yeah.
Okay, cool, fantastic. There are still a few questions, but we'll move on to ID checks for effective verification, if that's okay. And then if there's time at the end, then we'll come back to these original questions, or if more come up. So
yes, I have a lot less to say on this, Sophie. I was kind of hoping you might guide this one a bit more.
That's okay. I can definitely jump in here. So for Firmcheck, we often get the question within the software, we have a PEP and sanctions check, and we also have biometric checks. Is there any other ID checks that accountants, bookkeepers kind of need to be running, or any other identity verification checks that you would kind of flag as on the radar?
Okay, so as I said in the last bit, that you need to confirm the identity of your client. So it's all very well taking an ID documentation, but how do you know that ID documentation belongs to your client? Some people go and meet their client. Lots of people will go and meet their client because they want to see where they are, what they do. As we move on with technology, and especially since COVID, there's much less of that. So you need to be able to satisfy yourself that the ID you are seeing is your client. So either it's got to be certified as belonging to the person. Again, that's still you've got to work out whether not whether you believe it, but if I borrowed my sister's ID, I could have got her to certify something, and then I'm still handing it over to myself. But I'm being really suspicious here. Have a Zoom call with your client, meet them, or as Sophie said, there are so many softwares where there are, and Firmcheck's one of them, where you've got a biometric test. So it will actually take that documentation. It will read all the background information on the documentation and work out that it is a legitimate piece of documentation. It will look at the photo on the documentation. It will do a video call with you and check that all the biometrics work. That documentation belongs to the person that is instructing me. So that's great. However, there has been a lot of noise on social media and forums and things recently that you have to do that. Well, you don't have to. There is no rule on how you identify your client, just that you have to do it. So if it is getting on a Zoom call and seeing them, getting them to hold up their documentation, going to have a coffee with them, or doing an online verification check, then you're fine. The softwares, though, there are advantages to them. One, you've got it all documented for yourself. Two, it's easier potentially than going to meet a client. It's easier than arranging a meeting to see them, although, again, that face-to-face is really useful to getting to know your client. it also does, as Sophie said, a PEP, a sanctions check. It will check the electoral roll. It will check everything. It will confirm that address for you as well. Those are all really useful, and you are required by the regulations, one, to identify and whether your client is or becomes a politically exposed person. So you need to have a process in place for doing that, and these ID checks will often do that for you. That's at onboarding. Lots of people just do it on onboarding and won't do it again. So going forward, you need to either decide whether to rerun an AML check on your software, or have a meeting with your client and ask them, do a Google search, and all those bits and pieces. The sanctions check, the softwares will do those, but again, this one isn't quite so strict as a PEP one, because you are required to do sanctions checks on a risk-based approach. So you are not required to do them for all your clients. But because the software does it, lots of people do. But if you're not using software, just consider whether your client has associations with areas where there is more terrorism, that kind of thing, and whether it would be pertinent just to run their name through the registers, just to check. Again, you've got to justify your decision. If your supervisor came and asked you why you had or why you hadn't, you need to have a reason. You need to have that policy written in your policy document as to who and what would cause you to run a check. What would be your
like trigger?
That's the word. Thank you. Yes.
No, completely, yes. How I sometimes describe it, please correct me if I'm wrong, like with any ID checks that you need to conduct, you need to collect as much documentation and verify that documentation to a point. If you were to then hand that to someone else in the firm or to your supervisory body, that then that individual, even if they haven't met them, can without a doubt recognize that person is that person as well. Would that be a good level to kind of have it at?
Yeah. That would be your aim. That's the ultimate goal, isn't it? That you've got enough that it could satisfy anyone. Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I was going to say, when it comes to electronic verification systems, the rules are very clear, and the legislation that the user, so you need to be confident that the process is secure from fraud and misuse, is capable of providing assurance that the person claiming a particular identity is in fact the person with that identity. And that is all to agree that to a degree that is necessary for effectively managing and mitigating any risks of money laundering and terrorist financing. So you need to make sure that is what it's doing. So does it pull information from several different sources and background lists and registers? Are you able to download the information? So is it accessible? Can you create copies, or is it stuck somewhere where you can't then re-access it? Is it secure? Because this is someone's data. So the other thing that I also wanted to say, and the being confusion that we've seen with clients, is that an electronic AML check is not your client risk assessment. So the AML check will identify and check the identity of your client, but it will not risk assessment. They are two completely separate things, and that risk assessment still needs to be done. Even if it's done in the same software, it needs to be done. It is a different check.
Fantastic. I think we've got time for one question. This session's been actually really good. Like, there's been quite a few questions come through, so that's really, really great to know that we're on the right vein. There will be a course coming through, not this week, but hopefully soon, on ID checks, just so everyone knows. And now I've lost it. Oh, from Lisa. If you do ID check using software such as Verify at the onboarding stage, do you have to do this annually? It can be costly to a small business. So do you need to ID check your clients annually?
No, you need to review your clients regularly. And so that most supervisory bodies will take regularly to meet annually, or at least annually. If you are aware of any changes to your client or you have any suspicions within the year, you need to review the documentation. You don't need to run it through any software again. However, if you are relying on Verified to do your PEP search, that's not going to be good enough just to do it at onboarding. So you might want to add in an annual questionnaire to your client. And I did this when I was in practice, just to ask them things like, have you moved address? Are there any changes to your business, the services you're supplying? Have you become a PEP, or any family members become a PEP? Just those kind of questions. Put the onus on the client to a certain degree, just to help yourself out. But there are things that you need to do on a regular or annual basis that an AML check at the beginning of the business relationship will not carry through.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, that's fantastic. I'll leave Kev, who's the general manager at Firmcheck, just to pop in the chat about what PEP and sanctions and biometric checks look like within Firmcheck. And I'll flag some of the questions as well, and we can answer them through the loo break. But other than that, Lucy, do you want to do a little plug for Calathea Solutions? How do you help accountants and bookkeepers? We've got a little poll up as well. If you would like to know more about Calathea, if you click yes, Lucy will get your details and be able to send you an email. But tell us about Calathea Solutions.
Brilliant. Thank you. So Calathea Solutions
have already been very helpful here.
is an AML support business set up myself and my business partner Mike. Mike has years of law enforcement experience in financial crime, and then we both work for a supervisory body. I'm an ex-bookkeeper, so we have a real understanding of both the rules and how to apply them in best practice. We help bookkeepers and accountants mainly by doing AML audits, so that's your mock inspection, helping you to write policy documents and risk assessments, annual support package, so that we're on the end of an email to be able to ask questions throughout the year, and training. But we have a real passion and desire to help any bookkeeper and accountant become compliant with the regulations and fully understand what they are trying to achieve and why.
Perfect. That's really great. Thank you. Fantastic. Awesome. So we've put the little pop up there if you want to hear more from Lucy and Calathea, but I'll leave that at that. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. A quick whizzy session on very meaty topics, but you did really great explaining them. Thank you so much.
What I'll do is I'll stay online behind the scenes and just check the chat to see if there's anything that we've missed.
Thank you so much.
No
cool. Fantastic. Awesome. Okay, so everybody, we will start our 5-minute loo break, but it also gives us some time just to go through and answer those questions. A poll will come up as well. I asked you last week how you want to see events in the future, and all of you said webinars, which I was really surprised about, but that's really great. So it's just a little bit about that. If you could just let me know. I'm being a little bit self-centered and using this as a research experiment. But I will go away for 5 minutes. I'll leave you with some vibey Kiwi tunes again. And when we get back, we have a session on AML document management. Thanks so much, guys.
moment so long. I can only float in this water so far. I can't really take this feeling no more. Gotta get away for the summer. Gotta get away for the summer. Summer, summer. Gotta get away for the summer. Summer, summer. Gotta get away for the summer. A couple boxes, couple pills. I've been sinking into these tunes. They call me crazy, but we're all the same. Gotta take my chances, gotta make my moves, gotta make this happen. What can I lose? They call me crazy, but we're all the same. I don't know what to do. When the time comes, yes, I'll choose. I can only wait in this moment so long. I can only float in this water so far. I can't really take this feeling no more. I gotta get away for the summer. 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 I got these vices, I got this pain. I keep my head down for my mistakes, but I'm changing day by day. You find the answers and lost yourself. You keep pretending for someone else. You say I'm crazy, but we're both the same. I don't know what to do. When the time comes, yes, I'll choose. I can only wait in this moment so long. I can only float in this water so far. I can't really take this feeling no more. Gotta get away for the summer. 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 Take my chances. Make my moves. I can only wait in this moment so long. I can only float in this water so far. I can't really take this feeling no more. Gotta get away for the summer. Gotta get away for the summer. Summer, summer. Gotta get away for the summer. Summer, summer. Gotta get away for the summer.
Hi. Okay, lots of questions coming through. So nice to see that by week 3, everyone's still yapping and chatting and asking questions. That's really, really great. Maria, I'll just bring your question up just really quickly. For this, and the answer is yes, unless someone tells me it's no. But you do need to have, if you're missing documentation, you do need to go back through an email to get up-to-date documentation, or if it wasn't verified, but I'll get someone from Firmcheck to reach out. Oh, Patricia, thank you. There's a survey at the end that you can tell me how much you love me, which I'll give to you specifically and only you. Okay, so now we're going to rock and roll and talk to Mark Dunnell from FYI, who will be talking about best practices for document management. When we had our initial planning meeting, we established I'm basically Cockney. Is that correct?
Yeah, we had to explore what Cockney meant and Bow Bells, and then I didn't even bother going to the Yorkshire accent bit. So yes, we did. Yeah, it was good.
Technically, yeah, I could be. I saw some people who are in London today. I'm also in London, and suffering with the heat, but I'm in East London, so I suppose, and that's kind of on theme. But I will leave you to introduce yourself and rock and roll, and I'll wander away and leave you with all my diligent students.
Lovely. Brilliant.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Sophie. Right, brilliant stuff. Well, good morning, all. Thanks for really much. Thanks to the team at Firmcheck for inviting me along today. Wow, what an amazing session! I've learned loads. So my name's Mark Donnell. I've worked with FYI now for about 5 months. Let me just grab my slides a moment. Soph, I'm not quite sure how that would appear. Could you drop that onto my screen if that's possible? Lovely. Thank you very much. Trust you can all see that. So yes, I've been working with FY now for 5 months, helping firms with document management, and then more broadly, I've been working working with practices now for about 35 plus years. So I've been involved in a lot of different projects, and hopefully I'll bring some ideas today. Even if you just find 1 or 2, that would be great. So for context, just so you understand what FYI is, it's a cloud-based document management platform that can capture emails, documents for you. It's got workflows in to help you sort of manage and measure your processes, such as AML. It's also got automation AI in to help you streamline what you're doing. That's sort of pretty much our secret sauce in what we do, and it complements really well at Firmcheck and other systems as a wide documentation, the document management system. So you can check us out at fyi.app. That's the end of the advert. Right, so the agenda today. So this is going to be a bit different from Lucy's. I've got lots of slides, and I thought it would be helpful, so you can download them afterwards and maybe sort of pick through them. So I'm going to go at a reasonably brisk pace. What we're going to look at is we're going to start by looking at why document management is important, both from a regulatory and business perspective. I'm going to look in broad terms at the sort of documents and processes that we need to track and keep track of as we go through. And then I want to walk through a sort of an evaluation framework. There's a number of slides there, and I've kind of tried to divide things up so that you can kind of go through, download it, and use it as your own checklist and identify areas that you may want to improve or indeed change. And then we'll sort of summarize at the end how to take that forward. So let's start with the importance of document management in AML. From a compliance perspective. So obviously top line, this is about transparency and accountability, ensuring all the actions and decisions are documented, providing transparency and evidence. And then regulatory compliance is about having documentation in place, and this is necessary for demonstrating compliance during audits, and also internal, as in the conversation just now, making sure that everything is together so that somebody can pick up the file and see what's going on. These then reduce risk and ensure proper completion of your AML processes, but it also builds a standard by which things can be improved, monitored, and trained against. So we can learn a lot by looking at it from the perspective of the regulator, I think. So these are the results of the AML CTF 22-23 supervision report. There was 2,500 firms were reviewed against the 3-point scale. Compliance, generally compliant or non-compliant. 18% of firms were graded to be non-compliant, so pretty much 1 in 5 firms failed that review. I've sort of highlighted the kind of 5 takeaways, and I think 4 of these are actionable for me from a document management and process point of view. So inadequate firm-wide AML risk assessments, poorly tailored AML policies and procedures, insufficient client due diligence, and failure to document follow through AML processes. Lucy talked a lot about how those relate to the process, and we'll look at it from a document management point of view. It's interesting, sort of following the report, I was just reading through some stuff online, and one firm commented, and I quote, "We found following the AML guidance relatively straightforward for a small firm. but it's just finding the time to do it and to do an annual review. That's the main issue. So look, this issue of time constraints and resource scarcity is very, very common, not just on ML, but across all firms, of course, and particularly in smaller firms. And you're finding yourself sort of stretched between, your compliance obligations on one side and running the business, but they do come together. However, it's possible to solve these problems. And just as a point of view, in case Pillow Made, one of our clients, recently had an audit. They're a smallish 8-person firm, had a compliance check. They were told by the assessors that they had, quote, seen the firm of the future, right? Okay, so I'm bigging up our client there, but it's really good to highlight that good compliance also drives good practices, something that Lucy brought up as well. So then let's look at that document management from perspective as a business. So I've really boiled it down to these, I think, 5 essential questions that firms typically bring up when they're doing an evaluation of their processes. Efficiency, are we running the processes? Are they time consuming? Control, can we manage and measure where we are in the process? Accessibility, can everybody access it, and can we share securely with clients? So can we do that in a controlled way, and particularly as people working from home now? Organization, are the documents, notes, comments consistently organized and structured, and they're easy to find? So can we hand that file over to somebody else and say, here's all the information, and they could see everything together? And scalability, will our current processes scale up as we grow? So given time is limited and resources in terms of people are very hard to attract and retrain, it may be that you need to do an evaluation of investment in systems. So it's always time, resources and money, isn't it? With IT, it's one of those. So let's just quickly look at the broad type of systems that you could be using. Now, forgive me for perhaps oversimplifying this. These are document management systems and process management systems of some sort used by firms. And again, I'm not judging any of them at all, but they do go from left to right in terms of structure and sophistication. And I've divided them into these sort of 3 categories. Head paper is, the simplest systems, and we still see firms, relying heavily on paper. That's great, and that works okay. It does seem to me to be a reflection of the partners in that firm or the owner in that firm, and their perhaps their attitude to the future. Second category is using computer folders, filing things, and using Excel control sheets, and we'll explore the joys of doing that in a bit. And this is probably not scientifically, but I guess this is probably the norm that we see in firms. And then the third section is specialist software platforms such as Firmcheck, such as FYI. So if I refer to software through this presentation, it's that kind of system. Obviously, there are other systems available out there, and there's lots of good choices out there for you. So in reality, you may be using actually a combination of all 3. So just to iterate, 1 or 2 or 3, or either one of these platforms may be good for you at the moment. If that's the case, great, then you've got some time. And I would suggest you capitalize on that time now to evaluate whether this is going to be good for you at the next stage on areas you can tighten up. And I just want to put this against the context, because having been in the marketplace as I have for 35 years, I think things are moving really faster than they ever have. I mean, you've got a landscape with 24 equity-backed firms, I think it is now, in the UK, expanding their market share rapidly. You've got all the joys of MTD back on the table again. You've got the usual threats and opportunities of economic cycles to take into account. So I think now is a really good time to identify these challenges and costs and see if it actually makes business sense to move on 1 step here to the right, or maybe 2 steps. And look at that in the context of your future plans. So we'll return back to that in a minute. So next, what I want to do is to look at the documents and processes that we need to control. I've sort of broken this what do we need to track down into 3 areas. So the first of these is documents, and this is not an attempt to provide an exhaustive list. My fellow presenters will give you much more information, but I just thought it's worth putting up on the screen. So these documents obviously need, as discussed, need to be updated and reviewed on a periodic basis. It may be that you need to do additional checks and additional documents as well. It's obviously important that we collect these and file them as part of the evaluation and the ongoing review. We may also want to capture comments, questions as part of the process and evidence these as part of an internal review, very much again to what I think Sophie and Lucy were talking about, being able to pass that file on to somebody else. So not just the documents, but all of the context for that, and certainly to evidence that in an external review as well. But either way, they need to be consistently filed and available for the MRLO and the team. Lucy talked about some of these, and made a very good point that, you know, we need to track and evidence these, that we've done some of these checks. So I've listed them here on screen. Online, it's really a question of, you know, downloading that and crystallizing that at the point we did the review, and saving it as part of the client file in the AML process. So I said that typically be a PDF. We also want to evidence our research on Companies House, adverse media, etc. So we probably would want to use templates and checklists and prompts to help us here. So if you're using a files and folder system, you may want to use an Excel check sheet cross-referenced to the documentation. Alternatively, if you're using a specialist AML system like Firmcheck, then, you know, these will be available to save, feed into the review, update the review dates and so on, and they can help you complete the risk profiles using these results. And document management like FY and others can pick these up and also create the notes and templates and context for these, incorporate them as part of the wider firm-wide processes. So the next thing we want to track here is processes. So we gather the information, of course. We want to make sure we do that completely and accurately, measure the process so we can actually manage the work and make sure there are no bottlenecks in that. We also need to make sure we set up periodic reviews depending on our risk assessments, and we need a process that will bridge between the MLRO and the ML team across to other parts of the business, such as the accounts team, pick up suspicious activities and the like, and report them back into the MLRO. So I guess what I'm saying here is that the risk assessment I think of as not an event, it's an ongoing process. And good processes need to guide the user without too much flex. You want to kind of put some guide ropes around this, and that's much easier, to be honest, with software systems, but you can do it with Excel and other tools available. And that's key to managing processes, to reduce the manual updating required, helping everybody understand where they are in the process and what needs to be done. So depending on the scale, as I say, this might be managed centrally within a piece of software or a control sheet in Excel or similar platform. So next, what I'd like to do is just look at the documents and process and see how it applies to our files and folder system. So we've already highlighted some of the areas of challenge, but let's just, you know, kind of review them together. First of all, complexity. I mean, as your document system collection grows, managing the large number of folders has always become cumbersome, and it can be confusing. As you scale up and bring new people into the firm, maybe buy a new firm, then this is only going to multiply. I mean, when I've spoken to firms and looked at it, every firm is almost like an archaeological site. It's this different stratas of folders and filing systems, depending on the time you look at and who was in charge and which team you're dealing with and so on. So I'm sure maybe some of you recognize that. The other next challenge is sort of manually tracking the jobs. So maintaining an Excel document can be time consuming, and the thing here is, errors in logging can lead to misplaced documents. Getting compliance with this is difficult. It's really like a tower of cards. I find that if you rely on these sort of Excel systems, the moment they go out of date, people stop trusting them, and then they go back to their own version of their Excel document, which actually moves us away from what we're trying to do. Such limitations are, on documents stored on files and folders can be difficult. You need to make sure that your namings, your filing conventions are consistent across the platform. And in some areas where you've got more complex version control, also can be problematic. So recommendations, we talked about the clear and consistent naming conventions, maintaining a log. These are good things to do. Periodic audits of the filing structure, seeing who's actually being compliant and who isn't. I'd say backup as well is a really important part of this, to make sure that you're protecting against data loss. You can also use online tools to do this and archive in things like SharePoint, for example. You also got things like indexing software. If you want to sort of improve those things, the inbuilt indexing is fine, but it's a bit slow. You can buy additional indexing systems so that you can search through your data, things like Copernic and so on. There's also AI coming along, another technology, Power Automate and so on. But here's the thing, I've seen so many firms try and build their own systems rather than just get something off the shelf. So I caution you against sort of getting caught up in all the glitter of some of these solutions, when actually it would make much more sense and be much more efficient for you to just go to look around the market and see what could fit. When to move to this level 3, this full document AML? Well, I just highlighted increased complexity, scale or risk, need for advanced features, more robust filtering, version control, document sharing and collaboration, and compliance requirements. So that's really, those are the things that you kind of perhaps should start looking out for. But what we're going to do next is go through sort of more of a systematic evaluation. So I'm going to whip through these slides. Sorry, there's a lot of slides, but you can go back and review these afterwards. So let's look at the first one of these, is compliance and security. So what we want to bring out here is that these are sort of overlapping and interlocking requirements around compliance and security. Is a system compliant with industry regulations and standards? Kind of put into this, what would be the cost if we actually had to prepare for an audit? What impact would that have? On the right hand side, audit trails. Does the system provide comprehensive audit trails, document tracking? And in the middle, I've just in case you thought this was getting a bit too much fun, I've put GDPR in there. I'm not going to talk about GDPR in any great level, other than say that implementing robust policies and procedures that address both AML and GDPR requirements ensure staff are trained and make sure that everybody understands how both of these sets of regulations interact. So next, I'm going to talk about operational challenges. These may be considered to be slightly larger firm issues. So there may be issues with document duplication, redundancy, and version control, especially where you're doing those due diligence on those much more complex, going up to the ultimate owners, and there'll be lots of documents and lots of opinions that are coming together. Collaboration, this is important, really important for me in terms of how you collaborate internally and with clients. I touched on secure portals, how you could share documents securely backwards and forwards with clients, and those annual checks and questionnaires. How does the system generate those and run those against clients? And thirdly, sort of error rates. Are we missing information consistently? Where are the points of failure, and what do they mean for our systems? Cost analysis. So here we come down to it, money, right? It's about time and money. So people costs and storage costs, really, if you break it down. Costs associated with maintaining the current systems. Maybe that you still have lots of filing cabinets, and square footage has a cost, printing costs, office space, upgrading servers, computer storage equipment, all that kind of stuff has an implication. But the key thing here is, and I always find this is what I call invisible time. So at the moment, you sort of charge all your time to the timesheet or to the client, or maybe you don't even recharge for the AML. It all gets lost in the wash of the time charged against the job. But actually, what you want to try and do is have some eyes on exactly what it's costing you to deliver your AML processes as a discrete part of that, and that might be a little project or an exercise or a little sample that you do within the practice, and then that can then help you inform what potential savings either improving one part of the system might make or improving the whole system. Next is really important one, because again, you know, it's very difficult these days finding people and trying to get people on board, and people are always looking for, like, you know, I want my environment to be easy to use. I want it to help me. I don't want to spend all the time doing these manual jobs. So do employees find the current system user friendly? And, you know, is there a high need for training and support with the current system? Do you have to do lots of hand holding to get people to be compliant and deliver the AML and risk assessments process? Then again, for larger firms, perhaps there's technological integration. So this is about plumbing it into the wider practice software, and also can automation be used to sort of manage the data between different applications? And business continuity is always that one that creeps up. Firms never really, you know, it's probably that's unfair. Lots of firms do business continuity planning. It's just it usually catches us out. We never do it well enough, right? So are the current systems reliably backed up? Are recovery solutions in place in the current system? And is the firm prepared for disaster recovery if in case of flood, fire, all that kind of stuff? And then finally, for me, is, you know, how do you plan succession as a firm and moving forward? Are you planning to grow? Do you want to hand over to new business? Do you want to sell ultimately to another organization? Looking at how your future needs relate to the current system and being able to scale up and expand are critical parts of this evaluation process, in my opinion. So what I'm now done is kind of boiled down, if you like, the what the benefits are of DMS/AML specialist system. These are broad across all sorts of different platforms. You bring all of your documents, first of all, in centralized storage. So it consolidates all your documents and all your notes and so on into a single, easily accessible location. And it eliminates all those scattered folders and disparate storage systems and mental tracking. Gives you a structured organization. Documents can be categorized, they can be stored with meta tags and searched and customizable hierarchies, all that good stuff, so that you can basically find what you need. There's a large element of automated document handling, which is things like version control, automatically managing document versions, ensuring that the versions that the user's got is always the latest. There's automated workflows that will guide you through a step-by-step process and automatically sort of move things on, and giving you the choice points where you need to make the assessments and the risk assessments, and giving you the time to do that, and advanced search capability, so you can pull out what you need and review the files. I've talked about collaboration. Enhanced collaboration really for me is sort of real-time accessibility for people to be able to update and add comments and so on into the document and track those changes in real time, and permission management, so that you can control who can access the data commensurate with GDPR. Compliance and security, audit trails, data protection we've touched on, And we've also touched on that ability of these type of systems will scale easily with your organization and sort of and embrace and accommodate increasing volumes of documents, expanding teams, and particularly where teams don't have, if you're bringing a new team or you're buying a new practice, how those teams sort of integrate into your systems. And finally, into integrating into other systems like CRM and practice management is important too. You're really trying to achieve a cohesive ecosystem where your documents fit in as part of your broader business processes. There are, of course, challenges with AML and DMS systems. Always the question of change, who likes change? How many changes have you gone through recently with your team? You've heard of change fatigue, something to take into account. And that also then begs the question is like, how many changes do you want at one time? If you're going to nibble at something, is it worth making a step up and making a big change versus a small change? That's something you can look at. Costs of software, very visible to your fellow partners and managers. And obviously generally nobody likes spending any money that they don't have to, so making sure that you have done a proper business case evaluation and quantified that. Downtimes, challenges when you're changing system, you can manage those carefully by planning with your team and your supplier. They can minimize or reduce the downtime required. Recommendations in terms of taking on systems like this, it's always good to have some level of champion, so somebody who is a vanguard, somebody that the team trusts, that you train up, and they maybe then train down to the other people in the organization. Give those people some allowance to do that training, so you're not measuring them quite as in the same way as you may be when they're part of the team. So give them some allowances for training. PM's project management, so there's a project management role, somebody within those. Take a careful stepped approach, plan the work up front, and do regular reviews internally and with your suppliers so that you calibrate that you're on plan. And also, always good to go and talk to other firms. Definitely, I'd recommend anything that you're looking for in these spaces, and that cloud-based at this point. I've touched on automations and workflows that can help you, and I think those are important parts, and simplicity. So really, just to sort of bring things to a conclusion, next steps really are, do that evaluation, run back over those slides, have a look at what you're doing, try and put some numbers on them, try to identify two things, what's most important to fix. Ask yourself the question, is it about evolution? Should I just, make one change to one part, or should we move to a big system? Do the numbers stack up the business case? And what's the cost of peace of mind? So best of luck to all of you. I'm certainly here to help. Thank you very much indeed for inviting me today.
Round of applause. Thank you so much. I think something that people, I'd love for people to know is we specifically invite certain people on here, and, people take their time and create slides and think about what they're going to talk. And so I'm so grateful for your time and considering how you can help our students and what you have to say and everything like that. So thank you so much. Yes, amazing. We have a little pop-up if you want to hear more about FYI and oh yeah, there you go, a little poll there. More about FYI, what they have on offer. You can jump in there. But I just wanted to quickly address lurking around in the chat while we were talking. Just in terms of content that's relevant to bookkeepers or smaller firms, we will do a survey. I'm actually going to put it up early since that is all talking about at the moment. If you could put that feedback in there, I'd be really grateful. But I just want to kind of signpost here, everything that we've talked to up to this point is all things everybody needs to do. So when it comes to due diligence levels, when it comes to ID checks, when it comes to document management, that is all things you need to do if you're 1 or 100. But what that looks like is what is different. Something that that I would caveat as well is when you're a smaller firm, or if you're not managing a lot of clients, you can do AML compliance and document management manually. Like you can run that in a Drive or an Excel spreadsheet. I've met a very successful accounting firm who, before they used Firmcheck, they used a really juiced up spreadsheet. So you don't have to use software. And often if someone comes up to us and they say, I've got 10 clients, I'm like, you may not actually need Firmcheck or another option at this point. So, but just to really signpost, you need to do due diligence in all of the things that we just said. But as I said, it will all look different depending on the size that you are. But put that feedback in that, please, because then I can really make sure I nail it for you guys and make something relevant in the future, which there's lots of plans, if you can't tell by all the polls I've put up, that I've been cooking in my brain of what we're going to do next. So now I'm going to invite Ian Waters on the stage of practice compliance. I have a little list. Ian Waters has worked for the ACCA as Head of Standards and Director of Professional Standards at IFA, and now serves as Vice Chair of Practice Assurance Committee at the ICAEW. But when I first met Ian, I was doing my first public talk at DAS on AML project management. Bless, 30 people rocked up because Rachel Harris was on the main stage over somewhere else. But I saw Ian's face in the crowd smiling at me with all the encouragement. So I'm really glad I didn't know his background before that, because otherwise I would have freaked out a wee bit. I was talking about AML with someone so experienced. So we're going to jump into talking about SARS. But thank you so much, Ian.
Okay, Sophie, morning. Thank you very
Good
much.
morning.
And thanks for the introduction. Just a slight clarification, I'm no longer Vice Chair of the Practice Assurance Committee because I'm moving over to a more representative committee, which is the Business Law Committee for ICAW. Yeah, are you able to share my slides, please?
Yes. Sorry, I get all like excited and then I forget to do things. I'll share the slides. I'll wander away. I'll leave you to talk about the really hot topic of SARS.
Thanks very much.
I
I had a bit of problem. I think I'm still having a bit of a problem with my bandwidth, which means internet. That's not a metaphor for anything. So I'm going to take my camera off if that's okay. And I'm sure you want to focus on the slides rather than me anyway. I'm going to try and get through this in 15 to 20 minutes. And this is the agenda for today. Basically, there's just 3 broad areas: why we have to report, the reporting process, and broadly what to expect after you've submitted a suspicious activity report. So without further ado, let's try and make progress on this. I think, first of all, let's anchor ourselves in the legislation. Sounds a little bit boring, but I think we need to know exactly where our AML supervisor is coming from. It's worth saying, I think, that most AML supervisors do try to support their members if it's a professional body. And to some extent, the same applies to HMRC. But for a professional body, there's no point in placing an unnecessary regulatory burden on their members. So compliance is a better approach than enforcement. The term suspicious activity report doesn't actually appear in the money laundering regulations. As far as I'm aware, it doesn't appear in any legislation, but the money laundering regulations do mention suspicious activity disclosures. They mention them only a few times because they're defined with reference to disclosures made under Part 7 of the Proceeds of Crime Act or Part 3 of the Terrorism Act. And we abbreviate those 2 pieces of legislation to POCA and TACT, respectively. A recent amendment to the money laundering regulations in 2022 gives your AML supervisor the power to require you to provide them with copies of any suspicious activities disclosures that you've made. And also, the money laundering regulations require your supervisor to gather certain pieces of specified information. They're specified in Schedule 4, and that includes copies of any suspicious activity disclosures made by supervised firms. So it's kind of important that you know what you're doing when you're submitting a SAR, and as I'll be explaining later on, SARs do need to be of a sufficiently high quality. The term nominated officer has probably been mentioned already this morning, or perhaps the term MLRO or money laundering reporting officer. That latter term doesn't appear in the money laundering regulations, but it tends to be used very widely for the nominated officer, particularly when the same person holds the nominated officer role as the AML compliance role. But the nominated officer is defined in the MLRs as a person who is nominated to receive disclosures under Part 3 of the Terrorism Act or Part 7 of the Proceeds of Crime Act. So again, defined with reference not to the money laundering regulations, but to other pieces of legislation. Their role is to consider any disclosures that have been made to them internally, and they will have access to other relevant information that's available to them and the firm, and they need to determine, perhaps in consultation with others within the firm, whether it gives rise to knowledge or suspicion, or at least reasonable grounds for knowledge or suspicion that a person is engaged in money laundering or terrorist financing. Although we tend to focus on the money laundering regulations when we think about anti-money laundering compliance, we do often need to refer to the Proceeds of Crime Act and also to the money laundering offences set out in Part 7 of POCA and also in the Terrorism Act. Focusing on POCA, I'll often use the term money laundering instead of talking about money laundering, terrorist financing and proliferation financing, simply because that's a bit of a mouthful. But if you focus on POCA for now, sections 327 to 329 should not be ignored. They do list the basic money laundering offences. Put as succinctly as I can, that they comprise concealing, disguising, converting, acquiring, using or possessing criminal property, transferring criminal property from England and Wales or from Scotland or from Northern Ireland, and being involved in an arrangement that one knows or suspects facilitates the acquisition, retention, control, or use of criminal property. So those basic money laundering offences apply to anyone who fails to make what is known as an authorised disclosure. But of more importance are sections 330 and 331 of the of POCA that are fundamental to firms of accountants, because they set out the specific offences of failure to disclose that relate to the regulated sector. So as a principal or relevant employee in accountancy practice, you commit an offence if you know, suspect or have reasonable grounds for knowing or suspecting that a person is involved in money laundering, and the relevant information came to you through your accountancy practice or the accountancy practice in which you work as a relevant employee, and you failed to make the required disclosure. And the required disclosure must be to the practice's nominated officer, or if the nominated officer is the person required to make the disclosure, it might be that you're a sole practitioner too, and you have no staff, so you are the only person within the firm, in which case you have to be the nominated officer. Then that disclosure is made to the National Crime Agency. It's made to the NCA. It takes the form of a suspicious activity report or a suspicious activity disclosure, which is the term used in the legislation. And as I say, very similar provisions apply in POCA and in the Terrorism Act, Part C in the latter case. A relevant employee doesn't commit an offence of failure to disclose if they actually fail to suspect money laundering and they haven't been provided with the relevant training by their employer. I say this, and I think this is worth noting because it suggests that a breach of paragraph 24 of the money laundering regulations, which I think could be overlooked, it relates to the requirement to provide appropriate training. Such a breach is really a serious one because it kind of undermines this AML reporting, suspicious activity reporting responsibility. It states that a relevant employee must be made aware of the law relating to money laundering and to terrorist financing, of course, and must also receive regular training in how to recognise and deal with situations that may be related to money laundering. And so make sure the training is documented. In terms of training, there's a lot of information available on the NCA's website. The professional body supervisors in particular will often circulate among their members the NCA's publication called SARS in Action. It's aimed at all stakeholders in the SARS regime, but you will find elements in there that are relevant, very relevant to accountancy practice. Firms often use those for their own information, but also to circulate them among staff as part of their staff communications and training. According to section 339 of POCA, the form and manner of disclosures under sections 330 and 331, which I just mentioned for the regulated sector, may be prescribed by the Secretary of State. And in fact, it goes on to say that a disclosure that is not in the prescribed format shall in itself amount to an offence. So details of how to submit a SAR and lots more information may be found on the NCA website. You should be able to click on this hyperlink when you download the PDF version of this presentation. And do feel free to get in touch with me if you've got any questions. If my contact details are on the last slide. Thanks for putting the download in the chat. So my contact details are in the last slide, which if you don't see that slide in this presentation, have a look on the download or just find me simply by looking on LinkedIn. So if you click on the link, it lands on a page which includes a link to the new secure SAR portal. There are also manual forms that you can complete if you prefer, but I would highly recommend using the SAR portal, which entails the need to register as your firm's nominated officer if you intend to use it, and it'll save you time and it'll take you through the process a lot more simply. So I don't need to do that during this presentation. You'll also find some useful information such as something called the SARS Reporter booklet, and that carries lots of examples of SARS that have been submitted and what the outcome was in each case. And again, case studies in such a format, just simply by circulating this document, for example, and perhaps facilitating a discussion, they do form a very useful form of staff training. The NCA also provides a guidance document called Submitting Better Quality SARS, and there are some key points which I've picked out for you, which are on this slide, which you can go through in your own time. But just to pick out one or two things, it's really important that you're clear and concise. Try avoiding acronyms and jargon. I guess some useful regularly used acronyms could be picked out as part of the automatic triage process by the NCA. But if you use an acronym, do make clear that its understanding is well known. Provide helpful ID information. That'll include things like someone's date of birth if you have it. The detail around things like bank account details, numbers, etc. if you have them. Making sure that you're providing relevant details, of course, but detail nevertheless. Make sure that every field is completed. Use the correct glossary codes. So within the document, you'll see the glossary codes set out, but they are frequently updated. So have a look on the NCA website, and you will see a group of glossary codes which specifically relate to seeking defense against money laundering or defense against terrorist financing, which I'll come to in just a moment. So don't worry about that just for the moment. So that you'll find lots of examples also in the document on committing better quality SARS, so it's very useful. As has been mentioned already this morning, the money laundering regulations do require you to have well documented and regularly updated policies and procedures, and they must be related to the identified money laundering, terrorist financing and proliferation financing risks that you've identified in your firm-wide risk assessment. And you must have evidence that you've communicated those policies and procedures within the firm. And paragraph 19 of the regulation specifically requires those policies and procedures to include those that require anyone in the firm who knows or suspects that someone is engaged in money laundering, etc., to comply with Part 3 of the Terrorism Act or Part 7 of POCA. So, for example, I would suggest that your documented policies and procedures, and has been mentioned before, there are standard documentation that could be made available. And I think Lucy was saying that that's one of the things that Calathea work with their clients with to help put together policies and procedures. In respect of SARS reporting, those procedures must make clear the firm's obligation to report to the NCA and how that reporting occurs for this particular firm. It will usually be using the new SAR portal, I suggest. The policies and procedures need to clearly identify the firm's nominated officer and require a relevant employee to report to them if they have any knowledge or suspicion or reasonable knowledge or suspicion of money laundering or terrorist financing. I think the policies and procedures would normally require the use of standard documentation, which has the benefit of both controlling the reporting process internally and externally, but also documenting that process, and particularly the thought processes behind the decision whether or not to report to the NCA. I think it's always worth, in a policy, emphasizing the need to avoid tipping off. More of that later. And perhaps remind staff that in a particular situation, they may need to consider the need to seek consent to proceed with a particular transaction if that transaction might amount to an offence under the basic money laundering offences of POCA under sections 327, 328 or 329. So on that note, let's think a little bit more about obtaining consent. It's consent to proceed with a transaction. Let's give you an example. I think there are risks around operating a client account. So if there's something suspicious about monies being received into a client account and perhaps being asked to be transferred on elsewhere or simply returned to the client quite quickly, then you may need to seek permission in terms of a defence against money laundering should you comply with that request. Consent is sought by way of a DAML SAR. So in submitting the SAR, you seek that consent, which is the defence against you being accused of a basic money laundering offence. And the process is set out in section 335 of POCA for a defence, a DAML SAR, or under section 1ZA of the Terrorism Act in respect of a DTF SAR. I always think that DTF looks like daft when you see it written down. It's not a daft SAR, it's a DATF SAR. Do use the appropriate glossary code when requesting a defence against money laundering, and tick the consent box if using the SAR portal. What happens is that if you do not receive the relevant consent within 7 working days, then there is an assumption that consent has been provided. The 7 working days is the notice period that is set out in statute. In the 2 years to March 2023, each year the average time was only 3 days, just over 3 days for NCA to respond if in fact consent is not given. If you receive within that notice period, notice from the NCA that in fact consent is refused, there's what's known as a moratorium period, which is 31 days. During that period, the firm is of course prohibited from carrying out the transaction. And it's worth knowing that under the Terrorism Act, there is no moratorium period. It's either provided or it's declined. Once that period has expired, the firm is deemed to have received the required consent unless there's been an extension required by court order. I'm mindful of the time, so it's worth saying that you need to take great care when submitting any SAR, particularly a DAML SAR, and it is possible, in fact, for a case to be closed because the SAR isn't of sufficiently high quality, and even a poor quality SAR might be reported to an AML supervisor. There's a slide which just copies the information available in the document submitting better quality SARs. So those are some contact details. There's a slide that looks at the numbers of SARs submitted. Although the number of DAML SARs submitted between 2022 and 2023 decreased slightly, apparently the amount of funds restrained increased, which suggests that the quality of SARs is increasing. In terms of the quantity and accountants and tax advisors, you can see that the numbers are creeping up only very gradually. And I think it's widely considered that the number of SARs submitted is in fact too low when you bear in mind that the professional body supervisors and HMRC collectively supervise almost 51,000 accountancy practices. So what happens after a SAR is submitted? Well, you will receive an acknowledgement and a reference number. The reference number is quite important because you might want to link it up with future SARs that you may wish to submit. It's triaged, looking at the glossary codes and various information within the various fields. And if it's sufficiently serious, it may be forwarded immediately to the appropriate law enforcement agency. A SAR may be used multiple times, and so you're never really going to receive a notification of what's happened because it is held on file to be matched against future SARs if relevant. I think you're also unlikely to hear very much because there is the risk of tipping off, which is enhanced with there's a lot of unnecessary communication. So you're unlikely to hear very much, unless of course you are submitting a DAML SAR or a DATF SAR, in which case there might be a follow-up inquiry, perhaps during the moratorium period. If you do receive an inquiry, make sure that you know for sure who the inquirer is. It's fairly obvious that if you just receive a phone call out of the blue, you need to confirm who you're talking to. There's a bit of information about precautions that you should take when you look at the accountancy sector publication AML GAS, which is anti-money laundering guidance for the accountancy sector. I would recommend that you keep that downloaded, perhaps in hard copy form, to refer to as a reference document whenever you need to. The document on submitting better quality SARs is also a useful one to have by your side. Do you need to disengage? The answer is no. You may wish to for your own reasons, but you don't have to stop working for the client, except in respect of the subject matter of a DAML SAR, for example, obviously. Tipping off then, there are 3 requirements to bring about an allegation of tipping off. So according to section 333A of POCA, tipping off is committed when you disclose that a SAR has been made and an investigation is underway or is being contemplated, and the disclosure itself is likely to prejudice that investigation. No tipping off, therefore, is committed if you did not know or couldn't reasonably expected to have known that a disclosure might prejudice that investigation, if indeed an investigation is likely. Going back to that publication, Anti-Money Laundering Guidance for the Accountancy Sector, it clarifies that you don't commit an offence if you make a disclosure to another relevant employee within your firm, or in fact to an employee within a network firm that's under the same ownership or management as your firm. You can disclose to your AML supervisory authority. You can disclose, of course, for the purposes of prevention, investigation or prosecution of a criminal offence. And you can even disclose to the subject of the report if you've received notification that the 31-day moratorium period is being extended. AML GAS suggests that you mustn't disclose the content of that SAR. I can see the need to have to keep a client up to date, a client in particular, when it comes to being unable to carry out a transaction. But of course, you're on very sensitive ground, and I would definitely recommend that you seek legal advice, and in the first instance, have a discussion with your AML supervisor. I think the rule of thumb, of course, is that you don't disclose the existence of a SAR without good reason, but I don't think you need to tread on eggshells either. Do keep any records of any consultations and deliberations and conclusions that you've had either within the firm or with your AML supervisor or with a relevant lawyer. And do note that there is no tipping off offence if all you're doing is making inquiries of a client regarding something that appears suspicious and properly falls within your normal scope of your business with that client. So for example, if you're putting together a set of accounts and you discover that a particular sales invoice has been omitted from the accounts, maybe from a VAT return, you can discuss with the client why, advise them to remedy that error if it hasn't already been remedied, and that isn't tipping off. However, I would say that no attempts should be made to investigate suspicion. You simply disclose suspicion if indeed that is what you are disclosing. And then finally, please don't forget the need to revisit your CDD whenever you make a suspicious activity report in relation to either money laundering, terrorist financing, or proliferation financing. And I think that's it from me. If I can access my slides, just to say questions, and there's my contact details, but I'm happy if you take that off the screen, Sophie, and I'll put my camera back on.
I think we have a pop-up as well for people to like magically click and then get redirected to your website as well, which should come up in a second or two. Thank you so much. I listening to it, there was even some things for myself that were getting clarified when it comes to understanding SARS, but there was some comments like regarding SARS, we're damned if we do and we're damned if we don't, and kind of frustration that if something's, it sounds like if something's poorly submitted, I don't know if you can hear that all that noise. Sorry, I'm in my home at the moment, as is everybody. Yeah, so a little bit. Can you take over? Sorry, now I'm all of a sudden really distracted. I've lost my flow.
You said you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. Not quite sure what you mean by that. Yeah. I suppose it just shows the need for proper training and proper resources to hand for you to refer to. So I can't stress enough the relevance of anti-money laundering guidance for the accountancy sector, which your professional body or HMRC will make available on their websites, or you can just go to the CCAB website and find the latest version of that. It's approved by Treasury, so it's the gospel really, and it's very well laid out. So I could really take the easy way out and say, don't ask me any questions, refer to AML guidance for the accountancy sector.
Questions are over.
Hopefully I've given you a bit of a steer through the legislation, which, you know, sounds a little bit boring, but the intention is to say, you know, when you've got to engage with this process, and SARS are not theoretical. They're linked to the other things that we talked about in terms of policies being documented and firm-wide risk assessment and due diligence. You put it all together and you've got a good picture of your client and it's your client's contacts that mean you are in a good position to recognize when it's right to disclose. And then when you have guidance from the accountancy sector, guidance from you and from Firmcheck and from compliance for accountants and others, and this document on submitting better quality SARS and the information on the NCA website, you have a lot of resources that are available so that you do submit good quality SARS.
Fantastic.
Sorry, that was another full presentation I just gave.
Well, as we said earlier, you know, when you get AML compliance people starting to talk about AML compliance, we could talk till the cows come home, really. Like, there is so much to unpack. And I'm so glad that we get this platform to kind of talk to it and share it. So thank you so much. We, as I said, put a pop-up for people to get in touch with you as well. We will just about put up the slides as well from your presentation too for people to download. There is someone to my side who does help me here, so he'll pop them up. But other than that, thank you so much. And thanks for closing out our session today and agreeing to tackle the topic of SARS. But no, I really appreciate it. Cool. Thanks, Ian.
Thank you for inviting me.
Bye. Bye-bye. Okay, fantastic. All right, so that concludes today. I haven't quite nailed finishing on time. I'm so sorry, but I hope that you can agree that all the content that we covered is really, really critical. I'm gonna click some buttons somewhere. Would you like to learn more about Firmcheck AML software? So usually at the end of these, we've been doing like little mini Firmcheck demos, and I've seen most of you have been here for most of the sessions. So Kevin Lord, our GM, is doing a masterclass this week. And there's that you can register for. It's an open demo, but whatever answer you put in will honor. So say if you want some info on the Firmcheck software, keep up to date with it though, because there's some cool things coming that I'm not allowed to tell you, but if you ask me the right questions, I will tell you what they are. And what else have we got? What else can I give you before we leave today? I've got the survey as well, which I'll put more that there again. Let me know what you think and what you feel like's missing. There's already things that I'm cooking on in the background, and would love to hear your thoughts and what you would like to see from these sessions in future. What else goodies do I have? And then the CPD certificate. So I'll send the CPD certificate link in an email as well, but you need to click the link and put in your name and your email, all of that jazz. Did Ian's slides go up as well? No. Who knows? You can have them again. Okay. I think that's us. We are here again next week for week 4. Can you believe it? Like, I was like, we're only halfway through, and there's so many of you have been here for every session. So I'm so grateful. We have members of the ACCA compliance team again coming through. They'll be talking about how to maintain effective AML compliance. Emilio from Heat and Ventures will be talking about building your firm's tech stacks, which will be really interesting, and give Heat and Ventures a follow on LinkedIn as well and see how they're managing their firm, which is great, how technology can enable firm of the future. And then I saw as well someone from Bookkeepers Detox commenting. A lot of you guys were talking in the chat today about, being solo people doing it on your own. Bookkeepers Detox, if you are a bookkeeper, or if you just like looking at things, it's not a great example, but they're a really great group of people who you can follow. And we have Joyce O'Leary from Bookkeepers Detox next week on our panel. I can see Kevin Lord's fishing for happy birthdays. I don't know, it's his birthday, bless, but happy birthday, Kevin. But other than that, I will go away, and I can't wait to see you next week, and see you on the flip side. Thanks, guys.